All right, guys, so what we're covering today is chapter 1.3, midpoint and distance. Midpoint and distance. So we have a midpoints, and segment bisectors formula. So the first one we're actually going to look at is the midpoint. The midpoint of a segment is the point that divides the segment into two congruent segments. It's the middle. It cuts it in half. So on this here, M is the midpoint of line AB. M is the middle. So that AM, the distance from A to M, is the same as the distance from M to B. AM is the same as the distance from M to B. Now notice this here. I'm going to point this out right here. It has AM with a line above it, and then this symbol right here in the middle. That symbol, I'll make it a little bit bigger, is an equal sign with the kind of little swirl line over the top of it. And what that is congruent. It's saying that these two line segments are congruent to each other. Now this one over here, this right here, AM equals MB, is not talking about the segment, it's actually talking about the lengths. It's saying the length of AM is equal to the length of MB. It's saying that they have the same measure. These over here are saying that they're congruent, they're the same line segment. Here, these are saying that the measure, the distance is the same. So it's a little bit different in terminology, but it's about the same thing. So that's midpoint. Now, segment bisector is very similar, but it's a little bit different. A segment bisector is a point, ray, line segment, or plane that intersects the segment at its midpoint. A midpoint or segment bisector bisects a segment. Bisect means to cut in half, most specifically in half. So this here, CD, is a segment bisector of AB. So line segment AM is congruent to MB, and AM, the distance from A to M, is equal to the distance from M to B. So when we talk about something being a segment bisector, we're talking about the fact that it cuts it in half. It cuts it in half. So line DC is a segment bisector, a line bisector. It cuts it in half. Point M is the point bisector. It's the point at which it cuts it in half. It is the midpoint. So what that means is the distance from A to M, distance from A to M, is the same as M to B, whatever it is. So when we look at this here, we're actually going to apply this segment bisectors and midpoint in the skateboard here, in the skateboard that we have drawn, that I am pointing at right now, that you can totally see me pointing at. And I'm going to just keep pointing at it because you can totally see that. So as we're pointing at this skateboard here, the line segment VW right here, this line right here, bisects X, Y, this line right here, at point T, the point where they cross, right there in the middle. I'm going to erase that, just so we've seen it. At point T, right here in the middle, they bisect, so it cuts it in half. So that is the midpoint. So it means X to T, the distance from X to T is equal to the distance from T to Y. So that's what just that means, that bisector. V to T is also equal to T to W. But that's not as important. We don't really need that. We really just need this here. Because if we read on, and XT is 39.9 centimeters. 39.9. Well, that's not a good color. 39.9. 39.9 centimeters is this measure right here. Well, since these are equal, it means this length up here is 39.9 also. Because they are equal, they are the same. Because XT is 39.9, TY is 39.9. Okay, so we have that. Now it wants to know what XY is. Well, XY is the whole thing. It's XT and TY. Well, if I know one part of them is 39.9, and the other part is 39.9, and they add together, if they combine to give me the whole length, well, I can just add these two together. And if we add these two together, we get 79.8. 79.8. as the total measure. So XY in this case is 79.8. And again, when we write XY, we don't put a bar over it because we're talking about a length, a measure. If we're just talking about the line segment, we would put the line segment above it. But because we're talking about the length, we don't do that. And that's all there is for this one here. So again, this one here is another one. We're dealing with a bisector. So here, identify the segment bisector of PQ, then find PQ, the whole length. Well, the segment bisector for line PQ is Ray MN, is the segment bisector. Now, I'm not just picking that out at random because, well, there's another ray there, but if we look at the line PQ, we have these little markers right here, this one here and this one here. Those little hash marks tell us that those two segments are equal. They are equal. So it means that point M is the midpoint and it's cutting it in half. So MN is our segment bisector and it is a ray. Now we know that this is 1 7/8. It means that this over here is also 1 7/8. Because M is the midpoint, it cuts it in half. So those two measures are going to be the same. And so what we can do now to find the whole line of PQ, is we're going to add those two together. So 1 7/8 plus 1 7/8. If we add those two together, it will give us our whole measure. When we add those two together, we will get 15/4 or 3.75, or we can say 3 3/4. All of these are the same answer, they're the same number, but that is the total length of line PQ. And that's all we have to do for this problem here. So again, this one here is going to be very similar to what we just did. We want to find the segment bisector and then find the length of PQ. Well, the segment bisector for this is what's going to be cutting in half. What is the midpoint of this? And the midpoint of this here is point M. And the reason I know that is, again, we have our two little dashes. We've got one here and we've got one here. And the midpoint is point M. So a point M is the segment bisector. Is the segment bisector. Point M is the segment bisector, which we wanted to find first. We wanted to identify the segment bisector of PQ. Now we need to find PQ. Well, because we know it's a segment bisector, it means it cuts it in half. These two parts are equal. So what we can say and what we can do to find the whole length is take 2 2/7 and add to it 2 2/7. And we can add these together. Now, you can do this in a calculator. You can grab a calculator out and do a mixed fraction, 2 2/7 plus 2 2/7, which will tell us that it's 32/7, which is approximately 4.5714, and it keeps going on. Or, as a mixed number, it's 4 4/7. Any one of these will work as the correct answer. They're all the same thing. So the length of PQ is 4 4/7, 4.5714, or 32/7. We just have to pick one of those that we want to use. And that's all we have to do for this one here. Now this one here is a little bit different because they didn't give us actual numbers. They didn't give us numbers for what it is. They didn't tell us that VM is 4 feet. Or MW is 27, or that VW is 30. They didn't give us these numbers, but they gave us two equations. And what we know about these two equations is that this line segment here and this one here are equal. They have the same measure. They have the same length. So what we can do with this here, and because M is a midpoint, is we can set them equal to each other. We can set 4x minus 1 is equal to 3x plus 3. We'll set them equal to each other. Now, again, the reason we're doing this is because, well, I've got a little bit ahead of myself. I'm trying to solve it, is we're wanting to find the length. We want to find the length of Vm. To find the length of Vm, we solve for x. And once we find the value of x, we're going to plug it back in. So to find the value of x, we're using the fact that m is a midpoint. M is the midpoint. So these two segments, Vm and MW, are the same. They are congruent. And since they're congruent, it means the lengths are the same. Length for this one and this one are the same. So we set them equal to each other to solve for the value of x. So we set them equal to each other here to solve for the value of x. And once we find the value of x, then we can find the length of Vm. Now the first thing we need to do in solving for the value of x is we need to get the value of x's on the same side. And what I'm going to do to get the value of x on the same side is I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides. And when we subtract 3x from both sides, we're getting x on the same side of the equal sign, because 3x minus 3x cancel, leaving me with just 3 on the right side. 4x minus 3x is going to be x minus 1. Now we have x by x, all the x's on the same side. Now we need to get it by itself. And the way that we can get it by itself is we are going to add 1 to both sides. And when I add 1 to both sides, I get x is equal to 4. Awesome. Now we found the value of x. So that was our first main step, defining the length of Vm, is we needed to find the value of x. Now I'm going to move, apparently I'm going to rotate it. I'm going to move all this over here so I have a little bit more space to work. So we found the value of x. Now all we need to do is we need to take that value of x, that is 4, and plug it back into this here, 4x minus 1. So we're going to plug our value of x into 4x minus 1. So we'll have 4 times 4 minus 1. Well, 4 times 4 is 16. 16 minus 1 is 15. So the length of Vm that we wanted is 15. That is the value we were looking for. That's the value we wanted to find. And that's all we have to do for this problem here. So again, this one here is similar to the one we just did. Instead of having a midpoint as a point, we actually have a line. The line L is a segment bisector. It's cutting this in half. So it's telling me that PQ, PM, is equal to MQ. They have the same length. They have the same measure. So that is helpful for us. So that's helpful for us. Now what we're going to do first is we're going to find the value of x by setting 5x minus 3 equal to 11 minus 2x. Because we can set them, because we set them equal to each other. Well, the reason we set them equal to each other is because they are bisected by line L. They're cut in half. They are congruent to each other. So we can set them equal to each other to find the value of x. And once we find the value of x, we can plug it back in. Now the first thing we need to do is we need to get the x's on the same side of the equal sign. We need to get them together. So this here, I'm going to add 2x. Now the reason I add 2x is I'm trying to keep the variables positive if I can. And not happy-go-lucky. I mean just have a positive sign. Well, that kind of same thing. But I mean we're trying to get them all on the same side so they're not having negative. They're not negative. So these two here cancel out because negative 2x plus 2x is 0. So over here we have 5x plus 2x, which is 7x minus 3, is equal to 11. Then our next step is going to be to add 3 to both sides. And when we add 3 to both sides, we are getting x by itself. So we have 7x is equal to 14. Because again, we're trying to get the x's on the same side of the equal sign. And then we're adding 3 to both sides so that x is by itself. Now we're almost done. We have 7x equals 14. We just want to know what the value of x is, not what 7x is. So last but not least, what we're going to do is we're going to divide both sides by 7 to get x by itself. So we divide both sides by 7. 14 divided by 7 will give us 2. So we found the value of x. And we did that by first setting them equal to each other. So we wanted to get x by itself. So our first step here was to add 2x to both sides. So we added 2x to both sides, which got x out of the, let's see here, out of this side, out of the right-hand side. There's no more x's. They're all on this side here. And then the next thing we did was we tried to get x by itself. So we got rid of the minus 3 from here by adding 3 to both sides, which gave us this part here. 7x equals 14. We divided both sides by 7, and we finally got that x is equal to 2. We finally found out that the value of x is 2. So what we're going to do next is we're going to plug it back in. So we're going to take 5x minus 3, and we're going to do 5 times 2 minus 3. Well, 5 times 2 is 10, and 10 minus 3 is 7. Now you might be saying, well, we're not trying to find what PM is. We're wanting to try to find what MQ is. Okay, I used the wrong equation. Let's try it with the other one. Let's do 11 minus 2 times 2. Well, 2 times 2 is 4, and 11 minus 4 is, hey, look, 7. So it doesn't matter which equation we use. We can use either one, and it's still going to give us the same value. It'll give us the same value for it. So the length of MQ is 7. Because again, as we said at the beginning, these two are congruent. They're going to have the same length. And that's all we have to do to find this here. All right, so we're going to look at one more. We're going to do this one here. So at this point, if you've got this done, you can go on and move on. But if you still want to see one more done, go on and watch this here. So again, RS is what we're trying to find. Now this is a little bit different than the ones we've done before because RS is the whole line. We're not trying to find one of the segments. So it changes it just a little bit, not a whole lot, but just a little bit. So what we're going to do first is just like we've been doing. Line N is bisecting it. So it's cutting it in half. So we know that this segment here is the same as this segment here. So to find the length of the whole line, we're going to find the value of x and then plug it back in. And the first step in finding the value of x is that we can set them equal to each other. Because they are congruent, they have the same measure. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get x by itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 4x from both sides so that I get x on the same side of the equal sign, all the variables on one side. And 4x minus 4x, this cancels, leaving me with 3 is equal to, well, 6x minus 4x is going to give me 2x minus 12. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add 12 to both sides. And when we add 12 to both sides, we're going to get x by itself. There's only going to be x terms on one side. Because negative 12 plus 12 cancels out, leaving me with 2x on the right. 3 plus 12 is 15. And last but not least, to find out the value of x, we're going to divide both sides by 2. And when I divide both sides by 2, I get x is equal to 7.5. 15 divided by 2 is 7.5. So what we've done now is we've found the value of x. But that doesn't tell us what any of the lengths are. So what we have to do is we have to go back up to our problem, this here. And I have to pick one of these two. It doesn't matter which one I pick. And I've got to plug 7.5 in. So we can do 4 times 7.5 plus 3. Well, 4 times 7.5, we can do that in a calculator or you can do it by hand. I have a calculator sitting right here, so let's go on and plug it in. 4 times 7.5 is 30. Plus 3 is 33. So the length of this here is 33. And we know because of the segment bisector, the definition of segment bisector, NS is also 33. So if I want to find the whole length, I've just got to add these two together. And if we do, 33 plus 33, I'll write it over here to the side, is going to be equal to 66. The whole length is 66. So the answer we're looking for is 66 units, just units long, since we don't actually have a measure given to us. So the measure of this is 66. And that's all we have to do for this one here. Now the next thing we have is midpoint. Midpoint. Midpoint is the middle of a line. Now for the most part, we can do it, we cut it in half, this is equal to that, they're the same. Now if they give it in a coordinate system, XY coordinate plane, we're given 2 points. This formula here, x1 plus x2 over 2, comma y1 plus y2 over 2, will give us the midpoint. It will give us the middle of the line segment every single time. And that's all we have to use. We have to use this formula to be able to find it. So if I want to find the midpoint, given the two endpoints, we're going to use the formula. x1 plus x2 over 2, comma, y1 plus y2 over 2. Now, let's find the x1 first of the midpoint. We're just plugging them in. x1 plus x2. Now, x1 and x2 is just that subnote, that 1 and 2 is just there to signify that they're different numbers. x1, x2, or we can do it the other way and say this is x2 and this here is x1. It doesn't really matter as long as we're plugging in the x values from the 2 points. So for this here, I can say x2, so x1 I said was 4, and x2 is 1. I'm plugging in the 2 x values. Now we just need to simplify. So 4 plus 1 is 5 over 2, and 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. So I'll write this in red. Our midpoint, the x value of the midpoint is 2.5. And that's all we have to do for this here. Now we can do the same thing for the y values. So we're going to have y1 plus y2 over 2. And again, we just need the y values. So I'll call this y1 and y2. So we're going to say negative 3 plus 2 over 2. We're adding the y values together and then dividing by 2. That's all we're doing. We added the x values together and divided by 2. So when we add these together, negative 3 plus 2 will give us negative 1 over 2. And negative 1 over 2 is negative 0.5. So our answer is negative 0.5. Now, yes, I will agree 100% that we don't have to write it as a decimal. What we could do is we could write it as fractions. So I could say 5/2, comma, negative 1/2. So we can write it as fractions or decimals, either one. That is the midpoint for these 2 points here. That is the midpoint, and we're calling it point M. And that's all we need to do here to find the midpoint. Now we're going to come back to this one here in a minute. We're going to do this one here. This one here tells us the endpoints are 1, 2, and 7, 8. We want to find the coordinates of the midpoint M. So again, we're going to use our formula. x1 plus x2 over 2, comma, y1 plus y2 over 2. And really, again, what we're doing is we're adding our 2 x values together, the x values of the midpoint, and dividing by 2. So here, the 2 x values are 1 and 7. So I'm going to go 1 plus 7 over 2. Well, 1 plus 7 is 8, and 8 divided by 2 gives me 4. So the x value of the midpoint is 4. And that's all we have to do to find the midpoint. Now to find the other midpoint, I'm going to add the y values. So our y values in this case are 2 and 8. So what we're going to do is 2 plus 8 divided by 2. Well, 2 plus 8 is 10, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. So the y value of the midpoint is 5. And that's it. That's all we have to do to find the y values of the midpoint, is that right there. That's all we have to do for this here. I want to do one more here. At this point here, if you want to pause and try this on your own, go for it. Pause it, work this out, then hit play and see if your answers matches up. Now what we're going to do is we're still going to use the formula. x1 plus x2 over 2, comma, y1 plus y2 over 2 to get our midpoint. So for the x's, we're going to add our x values together, x1 plus x2 over 2. So our x1 value and x2, our x values are negative 4 and negative 6. So we're going to do negative 4 plus negative 6 over 2. And again, when we add negatives together, if you struggle with them, go on and plug that into a calculator, see what it is. But we're going to add them. So negative 4 plus negative 6, or negative 4 minus 6. That'll give us negative 10. Now negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. So the x value of the midpoint is negative 5. Now, okay, yes, I agree. We could have technically, at this point here that I just boxed, that there we could have plugged that all into a calculator. We could have put all that into a calculator and it would have given us the answer. Or we could have worked it out. It didn't matter which. Now we're going to do the same thing with y. We're going to add the y values together and then divide by 2. So our two y values for this here are 3 and 5. So we're going to add those together. We're going to do 3 plus 5 and divide that by 2. Well, 3 plus 5 is 8. And 8 divided by 2 is 4. So the y value of the midpoint here is 4. And that's our midpoint there. That's all we have to do for this here. We add the x values together, divide by 2 to get the x value of the midpoint. And then we add the y values together and divide by 2 to get the y value of the midpoint. And that's all we have to do for this here. Okay, now I'm going to go back to the one we skipped. Now the reason I skipped this is different than the last three that we did. The reason that this is different is because it's telling the midpoint of JK is M21. This is the midpoint. It already told us the midpoint, and it's telling us one of the endpoints is 1, 4. Now we need to find the other. Now we need to find the other endpoint. Because what it's telling us is x1 plus x2 over 2, comma, y1 plus y2 over 2. This is our midpoint formula. It already told us it's 2, 1. It already told us right here, this is the value 2, 1. But it only told us one endpoint. We need to find the other. So let's look at just the x values. x1 plus, well, they told us an x value is 1, because that's one of the endpoints. And then they tell us the midpoint is 2. They gave us an endpoint and they gave us the midpoint. So they gave us one of the x values that we're plugging in, and they told us what's going to finish out is 2. They gave us one of the endpoints, and they gave us the midpoint of 2. Now the next two steps are going to be the same for x and y. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to multiply both sides by 2. That's the first thing we're going to do. We're going to multiply both sides by 2. And when we multiply both sides by 2, this 2 and this 2 will cancel. They will simplify out, leaving us with x plus 1. I'm just going to drop the subnote and just call it x, because that's the only variable we have. Now over here, 2 times 2 is 4. Now all we need to do is solve for x, minus 1, minus 1. These here cancel out, leaving me with x is equal to 3. So one of the other endpoint has an x value of 3. And that's what we're wanting to find. We're wanting to find the other endpoint. We're wanting to find the other endpoint. And we found one of the values of 3. Now to find the y value. Well, they told us only one of the y values. And the y value that they told us, let me scroll up, is right here. It's 4. But we don't know the other one. I'm just going to call it y. Because what we did before, we'd say y plus 4 over 2, and we'd get the midpoint, because we'd plug in both values of y. Unfortunately, we only have one of them, which is 4. But they told us that the midpoint value for y is 1. So we can go on and plug that in. Now at this point here, it's going to look very similar to what we did with x. So our first thing we're going to do is we're going to multiply both sides by 2. We're going to multiply both sides by 2. And when we multiply both sides by 2, again, these two here are going to cancel, leaving us with y plus 4. Y plus 4 is equal to, well, 1 times 2 is 2. Now at this point here, we need to get y by itself, so I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. And when we subtract 4 from both sides, we get y is equal to negative 2. So the other endpoint's y value is negative 2. So this right here is our answer. The endpoint k is at the point 3, negative 2. And we use this formula here to be able to find it. We use this formula here to be able to find that value. And that's all we have to do for this here. So we're going to stop here. We're going to stop at this problem here, and we will finish this up on Monday. We'll finish this up on Monday. But I want you to try this problem here, this one right here where we're stopping. I want you to give this one a try and see if you can get it right. And once you get an answer for this here, you can email me and see if you get the right answer, or actually just pause this video right here. Just pause it, work this out, and then see if you get the right answer. Because I want you to give this a try. So pause the video, like I said, for the 1500th time. Pause it, work this out, and once you get it worked out, hit play. Now, hopefully you worked this out, you did pause it, and didn't just let this thing keep rolling, but you went on and paused it and worked it out. And once you finish working it out, you got the answer of 3.7. You got the answer of 3.7. Now, we're going to do this one on Monday. I will work through it all the way through on Monday. We'll work together, and we will finish up this lesson on Monday.